push in here. But all in all, the winds are lighter tomorrow, and it's going to feel a little less unpleasant because it's going to be less unsettled. Into Friday, the outbreaks of rain that move in from the west cross the country, followed by showers. There'll be some sunshine in between, but by Saturday, further wind, rain and cloud.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. In a moment, we'll be going live to the Commons for Prime Minister's Question Time, and we'll be going through the post-match analysis with my fantastic panel of politicians. And give me your political briefing and verdict on Prime Minister's questions, sending your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. PMQs is about to get underway, but first let's talk to Brendan Clark-Smith, Conservative MP for Bassetlaw, and John Cryer, MP, Chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party and MP for Leighton and Wanstead. Thank you both for coming in today. It's going to be quite an event, I imagine. Brendan, the leaking of that video last night, does the Prime Minister owe the nation an apology when he gets to his feet in the House of Commons in a few moments' time?
Well, the Prime Minister has been quite clear, I think, Gloria. He said that no rules were broken. The information he's had, that is what is very clearly stated. In terms of what actually did happen, of course, I wasn't there either, so I don't know. I think we could have a discussion about what constitutes a party and so on, and we know there's a lot of grey areas, as I think we've all had during these restrictions and so on. So if something has gone on and there has been a party and that's shown, then obviously something would have to be done about that. But if there hasn't and that's the case, then I think he's well within his rights to say so. What's the mood on the Tory backbenchers last night and this morning? What were the WhatsApp groups like? Yeah, I think I've drawn the short straw coming on television today, Gloria. Respect you for doing so. Yeah, thank you. But I think it's just one of those things. You know, we don't know. You do have these stories coming every so often. It is a difficult one if people have broken any rules, and a lot of us are very frustrated with COVID, especially at Christmas time and spending it with our loved ones and so on. So we're hoping that there's going to be less restrictions, obviously, and this Christmas is going to be a little bit better than the last one. So we'll see what happens later on. But looking forward to hearing what the Prime Minister's got to say at the dispatch box today. I bet you are too, John Cryer, Chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party. I mean,
this is obviously like a massive story, but actually, arguably, the bigger story is the vaccine rollout, the booster rollout. They're really getting on top of this, and isn't that the important stuff, John?
Well, actually, I mean, it is more important. But they're quite a long way from hitting their January target on the booster rollout, so that's not been hit yet. And the other problem they've got, well, I think we've got as a nation, is the cost of PCR testing. I mean, I've heard stories of PCR tests costing as much as 400 quid, certainly in excess of 100 quid. There needs to be some sort of government intervention to bring that down, because that's just not sustainable. There are an awful lot of people who can't afford anything like that. But it'll be, I mean, going back to PMQs, it will be interesting, because the battle between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson is always one where Keir's got a tendency to be quite forensic and pointed. I don't think the Prime Minister, perhaps it's his forte handling that sort of questioning, as we've seen recently. And I think Keir will be doing what he does best this afternoon. How the Prime Minister responds to that, it's going to be interesting. I think he'll come out fighting, but is he going to say the party didn't happen? From Allegra Stratton's comments, it's difficult to believe that.
Brendan,
but
there was a party. Come on. There was clearly a party.
Well, it's the thing. I think most people at their workplaces had a glass of wine or a mince pie and so on. And as you know, Gloria, the way we work at Westminster,
we weren't allowed to be in the office, though, were we?
Yeah, this is the thing. And if there has been a party that's been advertised out and so on, then that's quite clearly wrong. And I think we all know the difference between right and wrong with that. But the line has come out is that there wasn't a party, and that's what they're sticking with, and I fully get that.
Very strong rumours, Brendan, coming out that work from home, more than guidance, sort of orders are going to be restored. Perhaps we'll even get a Prime Minister's press conference today. Now, that will obviously move the subject on to arguably the important stuff and how we all have a Christmas and defeat this new variant. But I don't think Conservative MPs are going to be dancing in the aisles about more restrictions. You don't like it on your benches, do you?
Well, I don't think anybody's going to be happy with it, because nobody likes restrictions. And I think today, again, another special day. It's a year to the day since Margaret Keenan became the first person to have a vaccine as well. And I think that's kind of slipped under the radar a lot. It's one of those things. I was against the idea of things like mandatory vaccinations and vaccine passports, and nobody wants to see us doing that. I think we've actually done pretty well in the UK. If you look at the rest of Europe, they are having some severe problems, though. I mean, some have got vaccination rates as low as 35 or 40-odd%. So they're not out the woods yet. And hopefully when we know more about this Omicron variant, that we can make some progress with it. But we all want a Christmas, and we don't want to go back to restrictions if we can help it.
But it looks like they are on the way, work from home guidance and vaccine passports. How much of a stink is that going to cause on the Conservative benches?
Well, it's difficult because, again, with vaccine passports, there's an idea about freedom and liberty with that, and there's a lot of different ideological discussions you can have around that subject. So, yeah, I'd imagine that there will be some people who are not happy with that, but we'll have to wait and see of exactly what Plan B is and what the proposals are.
A couple of your colleagues, a couple of Conservative MPs have been tweeting unhelpful tweets, if you are the Prime Minister at least, this morning. Anne-Marie Morris, clearly there were rules in place that most of us were diligently following, and they decided to break them. It's not on, and at the very least they should admit their blatant error and apologise for breaking the rules they impose on society. She wants an apology.
But like me, Anne-Marie wasn't at that party either. I wasn't at that party. I don't know. We don't know at all. The Prime Minister wasn't at that party. So it's going on information and hearsay. So I think we'd like to see the facts, first of all. And then when we've got the facts, we can make a decision on it. And if rules have been broken, then fair enough. I think people need to hold their hands up. But if not, then, of course, and there's nothing to apologise for, then fair enough as well.
I would imagine, John Cryer, that Keir Starmer's... If it was me... Thank goodness it's not. I would just say, my first question would be, was there a Downing Street party on the 18th of December last year? That would be my opening shot. What do you reckon?
That would be a good opening shot. I mean, I often find that it's different if you're leader of the opposition doing Prime Minister's questions, because you have to make a statement as well as ask a question. Now, very often when you get into making a statement and asking a question, in a way, it sort of lets the Prime Minister or if you do that to ministers, off the hook a bit, because the question can be sort of sidestepped. But I think that would be the best opening question, and then move on to a statement afterwards, perhaps. But we'll see what he says.
The Prime Minister, I believe, is on his feet. Let's go live to the Commons.
Staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And, Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I have asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Speaker, bins left uncollected, council tenants being forced to live in damp and cold homes, £22 million lost on Providence Place land deal and a £10 million overspend on SEND transport contracts which were almost awarded to Labour councillors' friends. Today the council's external auditors released a damning report that surprises none of us. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that 47 years of Labour control in Sandwell has done nothing but level down my constituency of West Bromwich East, and that my constituents in West Bromwich, Friar Park and Great Park deserve better?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, because the instinct of Labour councillors up and down this country is yet again to level down rather than to level up. And I encourage her constituents to install a Labour council there as soon as possible, a Conservative council there as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard what the Prime Minister said at the beginning of this session, but frankly it raises more questions than answers. Last week, I asked the Prime Minister, was there a Christmas party in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th? The Prime Minister, the government, spent the week telling the British public there was no party. All guidance was followed completely. Millions of people now think the Prime Minister was taking them for fools and that they were lied to. They're right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that. But I repeat what I have said to him, that I've been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
Order. And right, well, let's just do a little less, Prime Minister. It's important, Speaker.
Asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate exactly what happened, and I repeat that there will be consequences for those involved if those rules were broken, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
An internal investigation into what happened. The situation is as clear as day. I thought last week was... Mr. Speaker, I thought last week was bad enough. Surely the Prime Minister isn't now going to start pretending that the first he knew about this was last night. Surely.
It's in his own house.
We've all watched the video of the Prime Minister's staff, including his personal spokesperson. They knew there was a party. They knew it was against the rules. They knew they couldn't admit it. And they thought it was funny. It's obvious what happened. Anton Decker ahead of the Prime Minister on this. The Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. Why doesn't he end the investigation right now by just admitting it?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I've been repeatedly assured that no broken, Mr. Speaker, and they may not. I understand public anxiety about this, and I understand public indignation. But there is a risk of doing a grave injustice to people who are frankly obeying the rules, Mr. Speaker. That is why the Cabinet Secretary will be conducting an investigation, and that's why there will be the requisite disciplinary action if necessary.
Keir Starmer.
Unbelievable. This pretense that further information's come to light. Give me a break. He's still taking the public for fools. On the day of the Downing Street party, Trisha Greenhall's mum phoned her. She was breathless and feverish. You might want to listen. Trisha followed the rules and didn't visit her mum. Listening? 4 days later, on the day the Prime Minister's staff laughed about covering up the party, Trisha's mum was admitted to hospital. Trisha followed the rules and didn't visit. Trisha's mum spent Christmas Day in hospital. Trisha followed the rules and didn't visit. 2 days later, Trisha's mum died. What Trisha wants to know is this: why did the Prime Minister expect her to accept that the rules allowed a Downing Street party but didn't allow her to visit her dying mother?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the first thing to say is that, in common with everybody in this House, I extend my sympathies to the family of Trisha, and of course I understand to Trisha and her family, and I understand the pain of everybody who has suffered throughout this pandemic. And I know that that the implication that he is trying to draw, that the case that we're now investigating somehow should undermine public confidence in the measures that we're taking. I think that's the point that he's trying to make. But I may say to him, Mr. Speaker, I think it is a great mistake to try to play politics with this issue. And I think that is what he is doing. I think that is what he is doing. And the public, Mr. Speaker, will not like to see. I don't think the public do want to see confidence in their measures, in these measures, undermined. And we are taking. I think they can see the difference, Mr. Speaker. We are taking the steps necessary to protect the public, above all, Mr. Speaker, by rolling out the vaccinations, and rather than focusing on the events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, that is what we are focusing on, and that is what I think the public will understand.
Keir Starmer.
But it's not just the events of a year ago, is it? We are facing a new variant. We may well be in Plan B this afternoon. Even the Prime Minister, must understand the damage he's done to his credibility in enforcing the rules now and in the future. Trisha made an enormous personal sacrifice to do the right thing, to follow the rules and help defeat the virus. That's what she was asked to do. Most people were just like Trisha last Christmas. No one was dreaming of a Zoom Christmas, turkey dinners for one, gifts exchanged at service stations. But the virus was out of control. 489 people died of COVID on the day of the Downing Street party. So the British people put the health of others above themselves and followed the rules. Isn't the Prime Minister ashamed that his Downing Street couldn't do the same?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about the events on December the 18th. They will be properly investigated, and Mr. Speaker, I will place a copy of the Cabinet Secretary's report in the library of the House of Commons. But what people should not do is lose focus on what we are trying to do now. Rather than, of course, we will deal with the events of what may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, Mr. Speaker. But what I think we need to focus on today is what we're doing to roll out the vaccinations across this country, and what we're doing to protect the public. And he is indeed right, Mr. Speaker, that we now have in the Omicron variant, a variant that is spreading much faster, Mr. Speaker, than any variant that we've seen before. And that is what we need, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, to focus on. And that is why I ask everybody to go and get their booster jab as soon as they're called forward.
Starmer.
The Prime Minister apparently wants us to focus on what's happening today. There were no government spokespersons on the media this morning. I see the Health Secretary has made it to the chamber. And that's the point, Mr. Speaker. This virus isn't defeated. We're going to face other tests where the British people may be asked by their leaders to make further sacrifices for the greater good. Her Majesty the Queen sat alone when she marked the passing of the man she'd been married to for 73 years. Leadership, sacrifice, that's what gives leaders the moral authority to lead. Does the Prime Minister think he has the moral authority to lead and to ask the British people to stick to the rules?
Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but the Labour Party and the Labour leader in particular have played politics, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic.
I've got to hear what the Prime Minister's saying, because if I don't know when something is said, and I must hear the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and if I may say so, throughout this pandemic, the Leader of the Opposition in particular has done nothing but play politics to try to muddy the waters, to confuse the public and to cause needless confusion about the guidance. The public, Mr. Speaker, have not been so confused and they have not been fooled. And they have got on with implementing the guidance, and they have got on in particular, Mr. Speaker, with showing great commitment to the health of this country by going forward to get vaccinated.
Order. Prime Minister. Mr. Streeting, we've had this the week before. I'm not having this every week. Now, if you want to be on the front bench, behave like you're meant to be there. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at every stage, the Labour leadership and the Labour right honourable gentlemen have tried to muddy the waters and to play politics, whereas the people of this country have not been fooled. And in particular, they have come forward to get vaccinated faster than any other country in Europe. We've now done 20 million boosters, Mr. Speaker. That is the single best thing that we can do, and I encourage everybody to keep going and get their booster jab.
That's so desperate, and even his own side can see it. Last week, the Prime Minister told us there was no party. Now he thinks there's something to investigate. The Justice Secretary thinks that the police don't investigate crimes from a year ago. Well, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service, and I can tell him that is total nonsense. Mr. Speaker, at Westminster Magistrates Court, right now, the CPS are prosecuting over a dozen breaches of COVID restrictions last December, including those, Prime Minister, who hosted parties. They're doing their job, enforcing the law set in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister support the police and support the CPS by handing over everything the government knows about parties in Downing Street to the Metropolitan Police?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course we will do that, and we will get on with the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Speaker, he continually wants to play politics with this issue. We want to get on with our job of protecting this country during the pandemic, and Mr. Speaker, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, fighting the drugs gangs, Mr. Speaker, when the party opposite wants to decriminalise Class A drugs, Mr. Speaker, and backing our borders bill, Mr. Speaker. They have an opportunity to focus on that tonight. Why not back our borders bill, Mr. Speaker, and have life sentences for people traffickers? That's what the Leader of the Opposition should be doing. That's what I urge you, rather than playing politics.
Fiona Bruce.
Yeah. As we celebrate the advent of Christmas, I thank the Prime Minister for his support for Christians and those of other faiths and beliefs who face persecution across the world. We here stand with them. The government has talked about the gift of resettlement for Afghans who are members of religious minorities, of those at risk of persecution, targeted for their beliefs. Will this gift of resettlement be available by the end of Christmas?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much for everything that she does, particularly as a Special Envoy for freedom of religion and belief. As she rightly says, we have an Afghan citizens resettlement scheme coming. We've already taken 15,000, but it's important that we get that scheme right, Mr. Speaker, and further details, including the eligibility criteria, will be announced in due course by the Home Office.
I now call the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are standing on the cliff edge of yet another challenging moment in this pandemic. Omicron cases are rising at a rapid rate over the coming weeks. Tough decisions will again have to be made to save lives and protect our NHS. Mr. Speaker, trust in leadership is a matter of life and death. Downing Street willfully broke the rules and mocked the sacrifices we have all made, shattering the public's trust. The Prime Minister is responsible for losing the trust of the people. He can no longer lead on the most pressing issue facing these islands. The Prime Minister has a duty, the only right and moral choice left to him. It is for his resignation. When can we expect it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the party opposite, and indeed the other party opposite, are going to continue to play politics. I am going to get on with the job.
Ian Blackford.
No dignity from a Prime Minister that quite simply just doesn't get it. Mr. Speaker, people across these islands have followed the rules, even when it meant missing friends and family, missing births, missing funerals, missing the chance to be beside a loved one in their dying moments. People have sacrificed, at times to the point of breaking, while the UK government has laughed in our faces. It is clear that this Prime Minister has lost the support of the public and now even his own benches. This is not a grin and bear it moment. This is a moment of moral reckoning. Every member of the Conservative benches must now decide, is this the man to lead these islands when lives are at stake? It is clear that this Prime Minister intends to desperately cling on to power, and I have nothing left to say to a man whose answers we simply can't trust. So, Mr. Speaker,
Order. I will hear this question, whether the front bench like it or not. Can I just say, I'm expecting better behaviour. The public out there are questioning this Parliament. Don't add to that question. Ian Blackford.
Questioning this Parliament and questioning this Prime Minister that we cannot trust. It is clear that the Prime Minister desperately is clinging on to power, and I've got nothing left to say to a man who we simply cannot trust. So, Mr. Speaker, it is time for members in this House to act. If he doesn't resign, then he must be removed.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his vote of support and thanks, vote of confidence. But I can tell him that I am going to get on with the job, and I believe that that is what is the right thing to do. And I think it is very, very sad that when the public need to hear clarity from their officials and from politicians, the parties opposite are trying to muddy the waters about events or non-events of a year ago, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they are doing today.
We now have a closed question. Bob Seeley.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, who is an excellent champion for the Isle of Wight, and I know there is ongoing discussion between Isle of Wight and the Department for Levelling Up about the unique circumstances of the island, including the discussions about the possibility of a county deal.
Bob Seeley.
I thank the Prime Minister for his response. Will the government accept the findings of the independent study that it itself commissioned this summer into a long-term, fair funding settlement for the island, the final calculations of which are due imminently? And in doing so, will he help me to right a wrong which has been ongoing now for the island, for my constituents, for some 6 decades? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much. He will understand it's not easy to break down the costs that apply to the service delivery on the island, but I know the Department is carefully considering the details of the study he mentions, and I'm sure the relevant minister will keep him updated.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the harm caused to political stability in Northern Ireland and to our economy by the Northern Ireland Protocol, noting the lack of progress in removing the Irish Sea border, and recognising that Unionist consent for the protocol is not forthcoming, what urgent steps does the Prime Minister and his government intend to take to honour his commitment to restore Northern Ireland's place fully within the UK internal market and to safeguard the political institutions in Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he and I have discussed this extensively, and he knows that we share a view that the protocol is not working in the way that it needs to in order to guarantee the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I don't believe things need to be that way. I think it could be worked differently, and we want our EU friends and partners to understand that, and we will continue to work with them to get them to see things in the way that people on both sides of the Irish Sea see them. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we do not remove the possibility of invoking Article 16 to protect trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, thousands of my Hindu constituents and millions worldwide start the birth centenary celebrations of the birth of His Holiness Pramukhswami Maharaj. His life was given over to people of all castes, races and religions. He was, of course, the inspiration behind the world-renowned Neasden Temple and hundreds of other temples. Will my right honourable friend join me in joining that celebration and giving good wishes to all Hindus across the world?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and I was delighted, and I thank the Hindu community for their amazing contribution to this country. I was delighted to visit Neasden Temple last month and to hear about all they've done during the pandemic, and I wish everybody in that community and all those celebrating all the very best.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chaos of this government is a distraction from the serious decisions it should be taking. We all know that the Chinese government denies basic human rights to China's minority religious communities. The repression of the predominantly Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang has been condemned as an act of genocide. In the face of these abuses, President Biden has decided US diplomats will boycott the Beijing Olympics. New Zealand and Australia have followed suit. It's International Human Rights Day on Friday, so will the Prime Minister raise his eyes from his chaos and commit the UK to joining the diplomatic boycott, or does his desperation for trade deals trump human rights?
No, Mr. Speaker, because we make all those points regularly to the Chinese, and I did to President Xi when I talked to him recently. As I've said before, we do not support sporting boycotts, but there are no plans for ministers, certainly no plans for ministers to attend the Winter Olympics.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham are struggling to access an NHS dentist, leading to pain and suffering, in particular for children, military families and veterans. My right honourable friend has invested a record amount of money in the NHS. Does he agree with me that some of this money must be used to level up dental care provision? Does he share my surprise that there is no dental school in the East Midlands, and will he back my campaign for a dental school in Lincolnshire?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know that Health Education England are working extensively in Lincolnshire to improve the recruitment and retention of dentists. I understand that they agree with her about the uneven distribution of dental schools throughout the country, and I'm sure as they consider their next steps, they will have heard her appeal.
Mary Kelly Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Storm Arwen left thousands of people in Bear Park, Ludworth, Sherburn and Waterhouses without heating or electricity. Yet it took 5 days for a ministerial statement to be made and a week to send in the army. My constituents weren't just left without power, they were left without a government that cares. Can the Prime Minister look me in the eye and honestly say that he did everything he could as soon as he could to help the people of Durham?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell her that I was in contact with representatives of the local authorities, of the Army, of Northern Power Grid and others to see what more we could do to assist them in restoring power. I sympathise very much with the families who lost power for an unconscionably long period, Mr. Speaker, and the House will have heard the explanation of the various electricity companies about why that was so. We must learn the lessons from storms Arwen and Barra and make sure nothing like that happens again.
David Warburton.
Mr. Speaker, I know we'll all agree that our vaccination programme has been a tremendous success. Vaccinations are the front line of defence against all variants of COVID, and the booster jab is a vital component of this. But in rural areas like mine, our booster centres are often few and very far between, and 2/3 of housebound people, those perhaps most vulnerable, most susceptible and most in need, haven't yet received their booster. So can I ask my right honourable friend what steps the government's taking to ensure more centres are available, particularly in rural areas, and would he ask the Health Secretary to meet me with some urgency to ensure my constituents can get their boosters and stay protected this winter?
Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker, amongst the heroes of the vaccine rollout are, of course, pharmacists, as he rightly says, up and down the country. And we have 1,500 community pharmacies vaccinating people near where they live. I know that the NHS are considering the need to support more pop-up clinics where there's a need. I'm happy to arrange a meeting with him and the Vaccines Minister to discuss this further.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the booster vaccines are essential in our fight against COVID. Speaking to clinical colleagues, one of the biggest hindrances is the 15 minutes people have to wait post-Pfizer. If we could reduce that or take that away, it could release thousands of hours of clinicians' time. So will the Prime Minister ask the MHRA and the JCVI to look to see if it is safe to do so, particularly for those people receiving their third Pfizer booster?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and I can tell him that we are in the process of reviewing the 15-minute waiting requirement for both booster doses, and we continue to be guided by the JCVI and the MHRA.
Catherine Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are having to resort to DIY dentistry, including performing DIY dentistry on their own children. Money, not anything has been allocated to NHS dentistry. So can the Prime Minister explain why my constituents cannot access an NHS dentist?
Prime Minister.
I thank her, but we're putting record funding into the NHS, including into NHS dentistry. And if she'd like to write to me with the cases that she mentions, I'd be happy to take it up with the Secretary of State for Health.
Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, the Prime Minister has spoken, I know, to primary-aged children about careers and the opportunities that are ahead of them. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that every child should have the chance to meet adults from different professions, different backgrounds, to be inspired for the future, and that this could play a major part in delivering the Levelling Up agenda?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend, and it's absolutely true that throughout our career strategy, we've invested so far £2 million to support career-related learning in primary schools, and as anybody in this House will know, you get the most extraordinary questions from primary schools children, and they are often very, very ambitious for their futures.
Jane Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, Jane wrote from Erdington. Her father, Vince, died of COVID. 5 days later, her sister died of COVID. She is devastated and appalled at recent revelations as to what has gone on in Downing Street. She asks this question of the Prime Minister: does trust in British politics matter?
Yes, it does, Mr. Speaker, and that's why it's so absolutely vital that, of course, we should get to the bottom of whatever may or may not have taken place on the 18th of December last year, but we need to focus on what's happening this year, Mr. Speaker, and I urge her and everybody else to get their booster jab and to look after themselves.
Mr. Speaker, at the moment, indecent exposure or flashing is illegal offline, but not online. I really welcome my right honourable friend's support for that to change when he spoke to the Liaison Committee in November. Will he support outlawing cyber flashing and other forms of sexual image abuse online in the forthcoming online safety bill when it comes to this House?
I thank my right honourable friend, and she's right to draw attention to that phenomenon of cyber flashing, and it is one of the issues that is being addressed by my right honourable friend in the Online Harms Bill.
John McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year I asked the Prime Minister what progress had been made delivering his pledge to buy 4,000 ZEBs by 2024. The budget and the spending review confirmed the UK Government planned investment will not reach that target. As Vice Chair of the Bus, Coach and APPG, let me tell the Prime Minister, bus manufacturers have no orders from his Zebra scheme. Production lines in Falkirk, Ballymena and Scarborough desperate to start orders and deserve better than this. Prime Minister, why is your government failing to deliver these orders and that pledge?
Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to delivering 4,000 zero-emission buses, and we're also committed to supporting UK bus manufacturing.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has already been asked about the Winter Olympics, but listening to his answer, I have to say, sadly, I think it is not at all strong enough. May I support the request that the UK government now acts against this dictatorial, brutal Chinese regime that is persecuting everybody from Christians through to Tibetans and terrorising the Uyghurs. Would the British government follow suit to the Americans, the Australians, even the Lithuanians, and please, please, I beg of him, give a lead for human rights and make a diplomatic boycott of these Olympic Games?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was clear from what I said earlier on that the government has no hesitation in raising these issues with China, as I did with President Xi the last time I talked to him, and there will be effectively a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. No ministers are expected to attend. What I think the House and no officials, Mr. Speaker, but what I can tell the House is that I do not think that sporting boycotts are sensible, and that remains the policy of the government.
Douglas Chapman.
The Prime Minister will be aware of the recent National Audit Office report on bounce-back loans and eye-watering levels of fraud and criminality uncovered. In the interest of the taxpayer, will the Prime Minister initiate a Great British Bounce-Back Fraud Squad to recover this public money and prosecute where appropriate, even if the crime was committed more than a year ago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will take action against anybody who's defrauded any of the COVID loans, bounce-back loans or otherwise.
William Ragg.
Mr. Speaker, there are media reports of a Cabinet meeting and press conference this afternoon to initiate COVID Winter Plan B without reference to this House. COVID passes will not increase uptake of the vaccine, but will create a segregated society. Is my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, aware that very few will be convinced by this diversionary tactic?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no decisions will be taken without consulting the Cabinet.
Alan Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This country is angry, and understandably so. Last Christmas, while we were in lockdown, millions of people were unable to be with their families. thousands of people waved through their care home windows at loved ones, wishing them a Merry Christmas from the side of the road. People died without that last touch from their daughters, their sons, their wives. Working in intensive care, I wept behind my mask as 3 children, talking to their dying mother on an iPad, begged her to wake up. Countless children now growing up without parents, while parties were held at number 10. Mr. Speaker, this is disgraceful. This is an insult to everyone who followed the rules. It is an insult to everyone who wasn't allowed to say their final goodbye. This happened on the Prime Minister's watch. So my question is very simple. How does the Prime Minister sleep at night?
Mr. Speaker, I want to say, first of all, I want to repeat what I've said earlier on about what happened last year, a year ago, but or what may not have happened. But I want to say this. I share and understand her grief and her feelings. I thank her for her service in the NHS. And, Mr. Speaker, I know how much this country has been through, and I know how difficult it has been through. And if you ask me how I sleep at night, well, the answer is, of course, I take full responsibility and personal responsibility for everything that this government has done. But I must say to you, Mr. Speaker, and I say to the House, the way forward for this House, for this country now, is to focus on the position we are in, and above all, to get our vaccinations as fast as we possibly can. We're in a much better position this year than we were last year, and that is thanks to the vaccination rollout, and I urge every member of this House to join that campaign and that great British vaccination effort.
There's lots of points of order. I'll take the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have informed the Prime Minister that I would be making a point of order. I was informed by the government front bench that he had to go. My goodness, I think those of us on this side of the House absolutely agree that he has to go. He has to go as Prime Minister.
Prime Minister's question time wrapping up there. Does the Prime Minister emerge stronger or weaker? After the break, we'll have the analysis from my panel. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. With me now to go through how Prime Minister's Question Time went are my fantastic panel, Conservative MP Brendan Clark-Smith and Labour MP and Chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party, John Cryer. So, Brendan, stronger or weaker? Does the Prime Minister emerge from that exchange?
I think stronger. I think he got in there very early about the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary into whatever went on, stuck consistently to the line, of course, that as far as he knows, no rules have been broken. So I think it was very clear there's obviously a lot of anecdotal stories that we heard about the grief that people have suffered and so on. And I think the Prime Minister as well, he conveyed the fact that, you know, there's a lot of sorrow with this and we do have collective responsibility. But I think the Prime Minister did quite well with the Prime Minister's questions, and it does kick it into touch a little for at least now, I think.
And Keir Starmer asked him to cooperate, hand over any materials to any police investigation. Some people might say that is throwing his staff under a bus. And that doesn't always end well in politics, Brendan.
Well, I think asking for police investigations, I think they've made statements about retrospectively investigating COVID breaches if there have been any, and that's not normally their policy to do so. I think it's more the moral side of it in terms of if it's your staff have done something wrong, not necessarily criminal as such, but something at least professionally. And I think the Prime Minister's right to say if he finds out that something has gone wrong, then he will take action on it.
John Cryer, stronger or weaker after that exchange?
You'd expect me to say weaker, wouldn't you? But I actually think he has emerged weaker. For one thing, the investigation by the Cabinet Secretary, there's no timeline on that. That could just disappear into the ether. And I think that what will happen now is that there'll be pressure on not just the Prime Minister, but other people in government to say, well, what's going to be the timetable for this? Supplying information to the police and the CPS, there will now be pressure to actually do that once this report's been concluded. But again, that puts further pressure on getting this report concluded as quickly as possible. But there was another thing I noticed. Boris Johnson is usually very, very fluent at the dispatch box and elsewhere for that matter. And I noticed today there were a couple of occasions, this is unusual for him, when he was tripping slightly over his words. So I thought that he was really starting to feel the pressure, particularly, I suspect, because Dominic Cummings, as he usually does, is out there doing his level best to undermine the Prime Minister, from what we can see from the tweets that he's been putting into the ether.
So just to explain that Dominic Cummings, the most senior aide to the Prime Minister, a year ago, or just over a year ago, before he resigned, tweeted during Prime Minister's Question Time that there was... He referred to a flat party which was held in Downing Street on November the 13th. Downing Street seems to have been very flexible with bubble policies and restrictions when all of us had to follow the rules. Brendan.
I believe the date that was given as well by Mr Cummings is the date he also left, so I'm assuming that's what he was referring to. As we say, you know, when you're at work, I think having a drink at work with colleagues, whether it's a business meeting or so on, I think that's quite different from having a party for 30 or 40 people and so on. So is it one of these things, there's you know, some shenanigans going on there, and obviously there's normally bad blood, I think, when people leave their employers. So I think there's perhaps a little bit of that there.
John Cryer, the Prime Minister said to your leader that he was playing politics with the pandemic. Is there a danger that talk of parties does take the eye off the more important issues? Is he playing politics with the pandemic? Is there a danger for Labour there?
Well, there's always a danger of these sort of accusations, but I don't think he is. I mean, actually, Keir for some time has been criticised for the opposite, that he's been too supportive of the government. Now, when you're in a crisis like this, say like this is unparalleled, at least since 1918. When you're facing something like this, you cannot constantly contradict what the government's doing for reasons of party politics, but he's not been doing that. Actually, we've been very supportive in many cases of what the government's been doing for I think, the right reasons and for honourable reasons. But we're also there to hold the government to account. And when he starts holding the government to account, inevitably you then get these accusations, well, he's just playing party politics, particularly from the Prime Minister. I genuinely don't think he is.
One thing that I miss from being an MP is because you can always sort of gauge how big an issue this is by looking at your email inbox. I'm going to ask you both for some honesty here. How is it? How many emails? How is that email inbox after the release of that video last night?
Perfectly honest, not too bad at all, really. I've not had that many emails on the subject. I think with the Owen Paterson affair as well, I only had a very small amount. I've had certainly more on this. Compared to, say, for example, the emails I get about small boats in the Channel, right. The difference is from there to there. So I'd say this isn't a Westminster bubble issue. I would say this is a little bit different today, but still in context, I haven't had that much contact about it so far.
John?
I would say, well, when I left the office, this might have changed, but when I left the office, I would guess about a dozen emails about this.
That's not that high.
No, but it takes a while for... If you've got emails, you know how this works, campaigning organisations do a standard email, they pour into your inbox, say about the health service or immigration or whatever. They pour in very, very quickly because it's just a case of them pressing a button and it comes in. With this is people writing to me off their own bat. They're not standard emails. Now, by the time I, get back and start looking through the emails again, I suspect that will climb because this is very early. It only happened last night. And I suspect most people out, people have got to go to work and all the other things. Yeah. So, I mean, people will, I think tonight, I suspect I'll start to see quite a big influx.
John Cryer, the problem for your party is that the government has not had an easy couple of months, really. We had the Owen Paterson affair. We have pictures of the Prime Minister not wearing masks in crowded places. We had, during the height of the lockdown, the Prime Minister's former advisor, Dominic Cummings, breaking the rules. Yeah. It is still not happening for your party. Any discontent or anger with the government seems to be temporary. You might get a little blip, and then it reverts to a Tory lead. It's a problem, isn't it, for the Labour Party?
But there are a couple of things to say about that. I mean, for one thing, we've got the biggest swing in the old Bexley and Sidcup by-election a few days ago, which sadly was caused by the loss of James Brokenshire. The swing to Labour was 10.5%, which is the biggest we've had in a parliamentary by-election for nearly 10 years. Now, that's quite significant.
It's true.
Also in a Leave seat, but, bear that in mind. Also, when you get a national crisis, I mean, we saw this during the war, and COVID's put us in, it's almost like, feels like we're on a war footing. People understandably say, well, we need to pull together, support the government, because there's a national crisis. At the end of the war, they elected a Labour government with the biggest majority ever seen. And I think that as things go back to something like normality, you'll see politics revert to something like normality, where we're going to be arguing about other things apart from just COVID. And I think that's when you'll start to see the Labour Party have a greater resonance with the public than it has, because we've constantly had this COVID issue up there, bearing down on us all the time.
Well, that's a fair point, isn't it, Brendan, that John Cryer makes?
It is, yeah, and it's very difficult to kind of gauge opinion because of what's happened with COVID, and likewise, flipping it on its head, you can say that the government coming in 2019, we've never really had the chance to get our feet under the table with the levelling up agenda and so on that we're now trying to push. So, yeah, I think there's interesting times to come. Another by-election coming up, of course, in North Shropshire as well, so it'll be interesting to see how that result goes. But at the same time, I think, considering the amount of time we've been in government, and considering everything that's gone on, I think we're in fairly good shape in the opinion polls, bearing that in mind.
And you won your seat, a seat which had always been Labour, at that last election. Genuine question here. You've got a massive majority. Went from, relatively safe Labour seat. You've now got a massive majority based on people, Labour voters who had voted Labour all their lives, making the switch at that last election. Now, instinct would say that vote's got to be soft. But you will know better than me. So I'm looking at you in the eye and asking you to tell me honestly how soft or otherwise is that former Labour vote that swung to you last time?
I think that's why you've got to work it, and you can't really take it for granted. So I try to be quite an active MP. I try to actually show what I'm doing. And again, you know, when I knock on the doors, the vote is very much holding up for us. So I think if you actually keep your promises, you do what you say you're going to do, then you'll be fine. The story up and down the country, of course, all seats aren't the same. And as we've seen, you know, you sometimes have to have a slightly different pitch in other areas. But certainly, I would say the red wall, as we call it, things are still very rosy, I would say.
And John, moving on to what we expect the Prime Minister to announce: further COVID restrictions, work from home guidance, and vaccine passports, Plan B. That's something that the Labour Party would support, I'm guessing.
Well, we've got to see what he announces, but yeah, there's every likelihood that we might support certainly elements. The problem we've got now is that because of what we've seen last night and today, it's going to be very difficult for the government to enforce it, because people understandably are going to say, well, you don't give a monkeys about these measures, why should we? But we've got to see what they plan to introduce.
And finally, to you, Brendan, William Wragg, one of your colleagues, accused the Prime Minister of diversionary tactics by potentially announcing these new COVID restrictions. Is he right?
I'm not sure. I'd say that's very cynical, Gloria, but you know, politics is quite a cynical game, so I can understand why people might say that. But again, let's just wait and see, really, with the restrictions and so on. We saw with the Omicron variant, we need a bit of time to see really how serious that is. In terms of deaths, hospitalisations, it's not just about the spread, it's about what actually happens with it. I'm not sure yet whether we've seen enough to bring any extra restrictions in, but I'm no expert in the medical and the science field. So.
You'll back the government if they introduce vaccine passports, won't you?
Oh, well, I generally don't like the idea of vaccine passports, and I've said that, and I think we've done really well in this country in terms of the freedoms that we've got, looking at that compared to Europe, for example, and where we've through the vaccine programme managed to avoid a lot of these restrictions. So I'm hoping we don't have to bring them in, and I think it has to be a pretty good reason for us to do that if we did.
Brendan Clark-Smith and John Cryer, thank you both for coming in. Come back soon. We've really enjoyed your company. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to you, those of you who've been in touch today. Sean emails to say, how can a party take place in Downing Street without the police who are on duty outside the front door? Interesting. Alan says, has Starmer not got anything else to talk about other than party politics? Rolf, or other than that party, forgive me. Rolf thinks the Prime Minister makes us the laughingstock of the known world with cover-ups and untruths. And Barry is furious, saying the credibility of this government has gone out of the window. Just sleaze and lies. It's all we will get until the next general election. But not everyone thinks the same. Parker says, surely there are more important matters to be debated in Prime Minister's questions, and Starmer should not be focusing on trivia like this. Leslie says, they are laughing at you, treating you with contempt. It's time to end this farce. Paul believes the Prime Minister must go now. You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Thank you for your company today. Thank you for your emails. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. I'll be back with Liam at 2, but for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast. Thank you.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Storm Barra may be now easing, but it stays windy through the rest of today with further showers or, in some places, prolonged rain. But there will be some drier periods.